When we get to the end of this book, there are not many answers to the questions that are raised. But as a way to bring our discussion of the text to some kind of closure, I'm interested in pursuing a couple of these questions to explore possible answers. The first question comes back to the question of Crake's plan, which I brought up last week. Crake's project has two parts: to create a new race of human-like people and to exterminate completely the existing human race. And Jimmy's role is a temporary one, of course. He's just a transition figure for the Crakers. So, what motivates him to do this? If we were in the classroom, we would spend some time talking about this, because I would like to, explore your opinions, because there are many possibilities. And so, but let's just go through a few possibilities. The first is the urge to create a superior race. What an accomplishment. He's kind of playing God, right? And if he's able to, why not do it? But it's a superior race. Crake sees the design and evolution of human beings as flawed. And we can ask, in what ways? Well, over the course of the book, you see that the sex drive and relationships as a cause of problems. We see the problems with the parental relationships, as well as positions of relationships of power. There's also greed and violence and the conflict between art and religion, which this last one, page 361, I have it marked. And there are others. He sees all the flaws in human nature. So he has the ability and the science to create. So either as being part of a noble cause, or ironically, a misanthropic one, and could it possibly be both? A noble cause to create something better, so you hate humanity and want to destroy it, or as a quest for power, or for the desire to play God, but not apparently for money, as he destroys the vaccine for the virus, which would be the thing that would make all the money for whoever had the vaccine. But then, so for one of those reasons, perhaps, or some other one, he proceeds in creating the Crakers. Somewhere along the line, he realizes that to be successful, he needs to exterminate the human race. The two can't coexist, and the Crakers, being peaceful, will be at a disadvantage. But how far back is this moment when he begins to plan the destruction of humanity? As far back as the first time Crake introduces Jimmy to the Extinctathon game in the Brain Frizz chapter. This is page 80 and 81. There are passages there on the Blood and Roses game and the Extinctathon game. And then Jimmy asks Crake at one point, "Why do you like it so much?" And Crake responds, "Because I'm good at it." Could this possibly be a bit of foreshadowing? So, to come up with some arguments in favor of this being a noble or moral intention, a better race of beings, Crake does design the Crakers, his creation, to be peaceful. And he edits out dangerous things like the sex drive. He comes up with a really elaborate sex process, as I hope you've paid attention to. But there's no ownership. There's not one person dominating over the other. So it sounds like weird, but there's a point to it. And then also another argument for the moral intention. We learn that Oryx says Crake wants to make a better place on page 322. Now, that could also be what she believes, but it could also be a lie in terms of Crake. So however, some arguments against this is that, for one, he uses the people closest to him, Jimmy and Oryx, to carry out this plan. And another one, he tells no one, not even Jimmy or Oryx. I mean, he tells them some things, but not the whole plan. But he really tells no one else anything. And then when he begins the process of implementing the Bliss Plus plan, he goes about it ruthlessly and coldly. It's hard to believe someone could be that heartless. Another motive, one very different, could be revenge. Who is attempting to do the right thing when he learns Healthwiser is breeding disease in its vitamin pills is bumped off. Also his mother. When Uncle Pete dies from a suspicious virus, Crake is, quote, there in a manner of speaking, unquote. That's on page 253. Later, Jimmy suspects Crake may have caused his death. When Crake confides in Jimmy that Healthwiser has been doing the thing with the vitamin pills for years, the reader, I would say, is led to believe that he is doing so because he thinks it is wrong. He knows Jimmy will think so. Jimmy says that would be really evil on page 211. And he tells him in connection with telling him also about his father's death. So is it too far-fetched to think that Crake takes revenge on people who would kill a man for this? And people who would deliberately infect people to ensure ongoing profits? And by this I mean not just the people at Healthwiser, but all those who place profit above human life. All of globalized capitalism, perhaps even all of humanity, because really everyone is implicated. But Crake shows no emotions, does not mourn the deaths of his parents, seems extremely cold about the whole thing. He also is cold toward others about sex, relationships. They're not productive, he says. However, what about when Jimmy reveals he hears Crake screaming every night during his Watson Crick visit? It's on page 218. Is Crake possibly repressing his feelings consciously to a point where they manifest themselves in his dreams, which he doesn't remember? One third idea for a motive. Is it possible that Crake was, after all, in it for the money? That he is so corrupt that he could act like he is pursuing this noble cause, but he is in cahoots with the rejuvenescence people the whole time? At the end, near the end, the guy who calls Jimmy after the outbreak begins, he assumes Crake is doing it for the money and that he'll give the vaccine to the competition. So the vaccine, which will be what can make all the money. I don't know. I'm not sure this is as persuasive, but it is a possibility. A second question to explore. What is the full extent of the connection between Jimmy and Oryx and Crake? As I mentioned in the last video, Jimmy and Crake see Oryx for the first time together on Hot Tots on page 90 and 91. Crake downloads the picture and we know Jimmy's thoughts. Do they both become suddenly fascinated with her, or does Crake do this because he sees Jimmy's fascination? Is he really capable at that young age of peering into someone's soul? Later on, also, he recognizes Jimmy's mother when she is executed. No, I mean at the protest. He recognizes her just as immediately. And he covers up the whole situation right in front of Uncle Pete. So this might suggest that Crake does exert such control over Jimmy. If so, he might just be recruiting Jimmy for his project this early in the game. This comes before Jimmy even goes to Martha Graham Academy and chooses his literary major, which is what Crake wants him for, his, quote, word skills, unquote. But if there is such an elaborate plan from the beginning, it might explain why Crake brings Oryx on the scene to keep Jimmy in the game. He may have traced Oryx through student services, or could have been involved in bringing her to the States and installing her in the San Francisco garage that she stayed in, all in preparation for his plan. That is quite an elaborate plan. But in this interpretation, Crake's using of Oryx's photo as a gateway image for Extinctathon is a way of keeping Jimmy interested. If Crake doesn't use Oryx to lure Jimmy, Jimmy kind of proves to be too slow to follow what Crake is doing. Does that make sense? However, Crake does seem to see something significant in Oryx from the get-go. There's no indication in the final passage on page 91 that Crake is observing Jimmy, and it says Crake occasionally does this on his own and has developed a small archive of photos. He may be merely interested in her look, but he also might be making plans to use her based on who knows what. It seems difficult to make too many claims that he recognizes in her the kind of talent he needs for the Crakers, since their creation is still far off. But it seems she has shown something he wants. But in this interpretation, his tracing of Oryx would be for his own interests, not to lure Jimmy. The coincidence of their mutual preoccupation with her, however, seems a stretch. A third question that seems to remain unanswered by the time we get to the end of this novel is, why does Crake bring upon himself his own death? And why kill Oryx? Jimmy calls Crake's action an assisted suicide. If his killing of Oryx is meant to spur Jimmy on to kill Crake, why couldn't he commit suicide, killing Oryx beforehand? I mean, Jimmy already has his orders to take over the Craker project. So if they are gone, either he accepts the job or not. It would seem that Crake is fully aware of Jimmy's devotion to Oryx, and that this graphic act will not only get him to kill Crake, but it will be more likely that Jimmy will tend to the Crakers. But why must Crake die? Is it guilt, not being able to watch all those millions of people die? It is understandable to some extent why Oryx needs to die. She is mortified when she figures out that she's been seeding the world with Bliss Plus and the virus, and she now knows that Crake is not the great man she thought he was. Would she likely continue the work he wants her to do? Not likely. Is it possible that Crake can't live with himself because of how he's used Oryx? Is he capable of this much emotional feeling for someone? And this part is not in my notes, and I'm just kind of thinking about it now. It's something I've mulled over from time to time with this, is that to choose Jimmy, he must have, think of the inhuman cruelty that there must be for him to willingly leave Jimmy, virtually alone on the planet with the Crakers without any kind of a plan. Well, I mean, there's the beginnings of plans and how they're supposed to live, but putting all that on Jimmy, it's just incredible. Finally, is it even worth asking the question of whether he kills himself? Because if it's discovered what he's done, he will be killed by others? I mean, there's not going to be anyone else around, but I guess it does take some time for everybody to die. And if the Bliss Plus people who were carrying out his plan unknowingly and who were betrayed are able to survive long enough, they could capture Crake. But if Jimmy is able to seal himself off from the rest of the world for weeks, couldn't Crake do that as well? Wouldn't he be able to find a way to conceal himself? There's one more mysterious question that for me remains unresolved, and I don't really know how much to make of this, but it does seem to suggest that maybe there's more here than meets the eye, in particular between Crake and Jimmy's mother. I think in the last video I explored that seemed that there seemed to be a closer connection than meets the eye, but not really knowing what to make of it. But there's a repetition of the phrase, "Don't let me down," or some variation of that, like, "I'm counting on you." These are said to Jimmy, and not just by one person. But I found several passages, and scattered, mostly in the second half of the novel, all in the second half of the novel. But it is something that I don't know if it's like the people here, like Crake and Jimmy's mother, don't have any confidence in Jimmy. I mean, he is kind of flawed in some ways. But let's take a look at these passages. So I pulled some of these passages out of the book and plopped them in here together so we can look at them next to each other. So this first one up here, I think this is, no, it's not in order for how it happens in the novel, but this is the first one. His mother, when she's being executed, and Jimmy is watching the video in front of the corpse men. And then his mother looks right at the knowing that he'll be probably seeing this. She says, "Goodbye, remember, killer, I love you. Don't let me down." I'm kind of wondering, well, what is she expecting him to do? If she's going to be dead, it can't be to, like, no, don't tell anybody that she's working for this protesting group. What is she asking him to do? And then later on, this is when it comes next, is when Oryx is trying. So Jimmy starts working for Paradise and is brought into this plan of training the Quakers how to live, and then Oryx lets him in on the idea that he's supposed to be involved in it. And Jimmy is like, very angry. "No, you're looking at the wrong man," Jimmy said. "If I spend more than 5 minutes with them, they drive me nuts." But Oryx knows how to be very persuasive, and we've already seen how Jimmy can't really say no to her. "I know you could do it. I'm serious, Jimmy. Say you'll do it. Don't let me down. Promise?" Stroking him, running a row of kisses up his arm. "Okay then, cross my heart and hope to die." All right, so there he is. And then finally we have the moment when Crake is bringing Oryx, who is very ill. We don't really get much information, but Jimmy's been sealed off, and Oryx is finally coming back, and he has Oryx. Crake is coming back, and he has Oryx with him. So Crake let Oryx fall backwards over his left arm. He looked at Jimmy, a direct look, unsmiling. "I'm counting on you," and then he slit her throat. Jimmy shot him. All right, so "I'm counting on you" is not quite the same as "don't let me down," but it's really saying the same thing. And so this whole thing is kind of, haunting Jimmy. Well, now haunting. At this point, this is at the end, after the catastrophe has happened, and Snowman now, not Jimmy, is taking over with the Quakers. But it seems to be, because this is in italics, this seems to be something from his memory that is haunting him in a way. And because it says, "Oh, Jimmy, you were so funny," that seems to be, it's implying that this is Oryx speaking, certainly not Crake. There are many times when Jimmy remembers, or Snowman remembers, lots of women's voices that say things to has said things to Jimmy in the past. But this one seems to be more likely to be Oryx, especially because the "Don't Let Me Down" it seems to be connected here. Right, but again, it comes back to the question of what do um, these passages suggest? I mean, is Jimmy slash Snowman someone who has been co-opted, maybe by all of these people? Um, is he that much of a tool in a way? I don't know. I mean, I think certainly with Crake he has been, and then with Oryx, she wasn't really in on the truth of the matter, but she certainly has kept Jimmy in the game. But I still don't know the connection to the mother, except that is a really that would make an interesting paper topic, I think, of going back to Jimmy's mother. Why does she say, "Don't let me down"? Why does she seem to have an interest in Crake when he first comes on the scene? What are we to make of that? So in a way, we are left with more questions than answers. But I don't mean to suggest here that Margaret Atwood's novel is not engaging and successful. I mean, it really is, and I think great works with literature often have things that are left there for us to be thinking about. She's giving us things to ponder. And so, I hope this experience has been a good one for you. It certainly is a challenging novel, but well, we'll just leave it at there.